Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're here today to talk about another aspect of gardening. Today we're going to talk about maintenance fertilizing. This is basically fertilizing to maintain a garden bed year after year. So most ornamental plants, at least, get a good start if their beds are prepared and amended, as we've actually discussed in previous videos. We've talked about fertilizers and amendments before. In the subsequent years, so in the years following that first initial year, you can maintain healthy soils and provide nutrients by spreading a couple inches of well-rotted compost on the surface of the soil. This is typically done in the spring or sometimes in the fall, depending on your climate and depending really on you. I like to prep my beds in the fall and then just kind of fluff them up in the spring, but a lot of people just like to ignore them in the fall because they're kind of over it. And it's completely fine to be totally over gardening by the time fall hits. And they just like to worry about making their beds all nice and pretty in the spring. That's fine too. Many gardeners around the world augment their good soil husbandry practices during the actual growing season by fertilizing their entire gardens or sometimes only a few selected plants like your bulbs, your annuals, or your roses. So you can choose whether you're going to fertilize everything or whether you're just going to focus a lot on your perennials, for example, because perennials often need a little more fertilizer because they've been in the same soil for so long. If you don't add something, they may not thrive. Applied at the right time and in the correct amounts, additional fertilizer can help to establish sturdy stems and foliage, burst bloom, and build up reserves for dormancy and reemergence in the spring when it comes to your perennial plants. So giving them what they need will help them come back stronger next year. Balanced or complete fertilizers are generally what you're after. Most of the time, a balanced fertilizer is going to work, or rotted compost. That's what we use most of the time. Rotted compost works wonders. If your plants are kind of performing not great, so they're a little bit subpar, you can sometimes fix this by adding additional nutrients. It's often difficult to actually pin down exactly what you should add. Okay, so that's why I generally recommend a balanced fertilizer, because it can be hard to look at your plant and go, oh, it definitely needs nitrogen. Because fertilizing a plant incorrectly can do more harm than good. So excess nitrogen, for example, can help promote foliage growth, but sometimes that's at the expense of flowers and fruit. So whether you're seeking to boost healthy plants or rejuvenate your ailing ones, it's best to figure out exactly what they need if you're not going to go balanced. Don't just kind of wing it. So you might want to talk to your local nursery, a local gardening expert. Every area has one. Find someone who specializes in the same kind of plants you have and ask. Most people are more than willing to share their knowledge and to talk to you a little bit. When it comes to fertilizing your vegetable gardens, most of us like to rework our soil in the vegetable gardens, either in the very late fall, right before it freezes, or in the very early spring, right after the soil is no longer frozen. Can't work frozen soil. So during this process, you can augment and adjust the nutrients in your soil, either with specific nutrient sources or by the addition of liberal amounts of well-rotted compost. That's what we do. And I almost always recommend just, light layer. It doesn't have to be thick. A light layer of nice, well-rotted compost before you plant. So do that a week or two before you plant, and then kind of work it in with your hand cultivator just to kind of give that soil the boost it needs. If you're doing it in the fall, you can lay the compost and probably just ignore it. You probably don't even have to work it in. You just kind of lay it on there in the fall, move on with your day, come back tomorrow, and everything will look really good in the spring. It doesn't really take that much work, but it can make all of the difference. So gardeners who are seeking to boost their yields often will apply supplementary fertilizers to all or some of the plants. So you just have to know where you want to apply these things and what fertilizer should you use. I like granular fertilizers. These are really, really easy to use out in your vegetable gardens because whether they are derived organically or synthetic. They're really easy to measure out and apply to both your ornamental and your vegetable gardens. You can sprinkle these granules around the base of plants, taking care to keep them away from the stems and off the leaves because you don't want to burn your leaves. You want to work those granules into the soil either with your fingers or a hand cultivator. This is why I love my hand cultivators. Then you want to apply water liberally so that helps those granules dissolve. If you can, do this right before a rainstorm because then you don't even have to worry about the water because the rain is going to handle it for you. Slow release fertilizers can be spread as little as once a year. I like slow release because you don't have to do very much about it. You put them into the soil and they slowly release, that's why they're called slow release, they slowly release the nutrients into the soil over time. So you don't have to come back every month and keep going because you just fertilize in the spring. This is especially for an older bed. A new bed with new soil, you probably don't have to do that. But in subsequent years, you want to keep that soil kind of alive and able to sustain your plants. So slow release fertilizers are especially valuable for plants that as they grow and as the season progresses, it becomes harder to get to where the actual plant is. So things that really get bushy, it can be hard to get right in there. So a slow release fertilizer applied at the beginning of the year before things get kind of crazy and out of control with all your plants everywhere works a lot better than having to kind of squeeze your way in and trying to separate out your plants, trying to get right to that soil. So that's another reason I really do like slow release fertilizers. Slow release fertilizers do tend to be a little bit more expensive. However, because you're only applying them once, maybe twice throughout the year, you don't need as much. So the cost basically works itself out. It's just, do you want to pay more money for a fertilizer that you are applying less often, or do you want to apply less money to a fertilizer you are applying more often? So they almost end up costing the same in the end. Most organically derived fertilizers release their nutrients slowly anyway. So if it's an organically derived fertilizer, such as your compost, it won't say slow release, but it tends to be slow release anyway. So I really recommend compost, and I've said that a lot, I know, but that is what you really should use on your gardens if you can. You can use synthetic fertilizers if you need, but rotted compost is probably the absolute best thing you can put on your gardens. So if you have access to it, now obviously we're a hobby farm, we do. If you have access to it or you can get it, get some rotted compost, get that on there because it's just easier to use. You just get it on there, ignore it, okay? Because it's automatically slow release anyway. If you have potted plants, remember that you're going to need to fertilize quite a bit, okay? Not all at once, but a self-contained potted plant can't extract the nutrients it needs from the surrounding soil because there is no surrounding soil. It's just the plant, the pot, and the soil in the pot. So you're going to have to make sure you fertilize these as well. I still prefer the granular fertilizers for my potted plants. You can use a liquid fertilizer. Just really read that packaging. Make sure you are mixing it appropriately because liquid fertilizers can be a little bit finicky. They're easy to apply to container plants, and they do tend to be a little bit more expensive, but they're easy to apply and they're easy to use if you read the package directions. So if you do want to use a liquid fertilizer, mix it correctly, apply it correctly, and you should be golden. I still prefer the slow release granules for my potted plants just because I find they work better. But if you would rather use a pretty fast acting liquid fertilizer, you absolutely can do that. When it comes to your trees and shrubs, you don't strictly need fertilizer for them because they're a longer growing, they're going to be there a long time, they'll figure it out kind of thing. If you do want to use some fertilizer, young trees and young shrubs can benefit from fertilization before they're at their full size. Many do fine with no fertilizer at all, but you can certainly add some if you want. Trees and shrubs grown in your garden beds or on your lawn will automatically benefit from the fertilizers you're applying anyway, so you don't necessarily need to specifically apply a fertilizer for the trees and the shrubs. They'll get those nutrients from wherever they need to because their roots tend to be longer, deeper, more spread out. They will find the nutrients they're looking for. So you don't have to worry about that too much. If you have flowering shrubs and you want to kind of boost their flowering, you want more flowers or more frequent flowers, try compost. I know, I keep saying compost, but the compost will just give the shrub a little bit of a boost, and therefore you might have more flowers or you might have more frequent flowering, and it'll just look a lot prettier. So definitely consider compost on the bottom of those flowering shrubs just to kind of fancy them up a bit. Anyway, that is about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. Remember to maintain those beds. All your garden beds do need maintenance if you do want them to perform well year after year. You can't just ignore them. But with a little tender care, they will flourish for years to come. We'll see you tomorrow.